Hello everybody, this is my presentation for the website that I created for One Faith Church. Why is it? There we go. So, for for introductions, my name is Jalen Essex, and the name that I chose was Essex Cybersecurity Solutions. I'm in a team by myself, so, whenever I was working on this website, it was a lot of work. However, I did have experience with creating websites, so I did feel pretty comfortable doing it. My experience was in my web web development, sorry, front end web development final two. Oh man, front end web development two final. Yeah. Basically, I had a website that I like the basic workings of a website that I'd created in a previous class, and I took it and made it into a almost fully functioning website. I was close, but not quite there. So because of that experience, it made the first part of this, creating the basic web pages, getting the forum set up and everything, it made that a lot easier because I knew what it should look like. So for my client, his name is Clark Friend. He's the pastor at One Faith Church. I went to school with his son, Houston Friend. We go way back, like kindergarten, since kindergarten and then all the way through high school. So we know each other very well. Uh, and whenever I went to talk to him about some of the issues that I was having with finding people for capstones and whatnot, he said that he was looking for somebody to build a website and asked if I wanted to do that for him. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Uh, Even though Clark Friend is the owner, I will be communicating with Houston because we know each other a lot better, and he can break it down to his father better than I can some of the more technical terms. Now onto my project in particular. So, like I said, I was talking with Houston about how I was struggling to find a capstone, somebody to take me on for a capstone project. I'd reached out and hadn't heard back, so I was feeling kind of panicked, and anxious because the deadline was coming up and I still hadn't found anybody. And so he said that his dad was looking for somebody to build a website for their church. And well, since I had experience and I was looking for somebody, something to do for my capstone project, I volunteered for it. When I was talking to him about what he wanted the project to look like, basically he gave me full control over like the styles, the color scheme, the content on the web page. He left that up to me and trusted that I could get it done. And then the same thing for the whether I use the coding or the platform. He said whichever one was more comfortable, as long as it was as long as it wasn't over the top, basically. So I think what I ended up showing him, what I ended up creating, wasn't over the top. I kept it fairly simple. He was very happy with it, said that it would work exactly for what they needed it to do. Like, or let me rephrase that. It would do exactly what they needed it to do. So, there is that, even though it's not, I wasn't able to get it fully finished. He said that he was happy with it. So, I have some examples. This right here is my homepage. It basically goes over, it's like an overview of what the church is about, the faith that they sell, or the faith that they are, like what they worship, things of that nature. Basically, an overview of the church. So that's a homepage. For the About Us page, I did get in contact with Houston to ask him what he wanted on this page, and he gave me a rundown of some of the things they do, what to expect, some of the things that they offer, and you can see it. Again, I have it right here. And another thing I do want to point out, because it was a decision that I made while I was working on it. So as I'm navigating, because you have uh, basically like a navigation bar up to the top left. Originally, I did have just all the pages right there, but then as I was thinking about it, maybe it can be a bit confusing for somebody who's trying to navigate the page. I didn't have anything that let you know where you were at on the page, and the only thing I could think to add would be clunky and confusing. So I decided the best course of action would be to just, once you click on a page, it doesn't show up anymore. So for a home page, the home page doesn't show up in the list. And then when we go to the About, the About's no longer on the list. So Again, still kind of clunky, but I figure it's better than somebody trying to use a website, trying to use the web page, and then, why is it when they click on, if the about page was still there and you're on the about us page, why is it that when I'm clicking on it, nothing is happening? You know, so just a little tidbit. Next up is the services page, and it does say part one because when I was talking to Houston at my last meeting, he had me add another some more stuff to the page, and there was no way to capture it all in one picture and then have it be legible. Basically, it was either going to be really small or I chop it in half. So I chopped it in half. This basically goes over the stuff that they offer, the times that they offer it, some details. Uh, and so that's the first half of the services. And I believe I got, yeah, right here, so 7 to 9 p.m. for hyphen student group and all that other stuff. On the second half of the services page, so they have like their Sunday service. It's at 10 o'clock in the morning, and then again at 6:30 at night, and I believe it only runs 2 hours, so 10 to 12, and then 6:30 to 8:30, and then again on Wednesday. And I think that's more like a youth group, if I had to guess. I didn't get confirmation from Houston on that. I was more worried about some of the other stuff that they offered on that, but I thought I would mention that. So this was the second half of the page he had me add, and then also I he wanted me to put the address on the page, so I got that added. After the services page was the announcements page, which was originally the forum. Uh, so what I because at the last meeting, originally when I asked him about the forum, he was all for the idea, and he thought it would be a great idea, and instead of having to go, you go to the website for the information, but then you go to the Facebook group for this, to have it all in one page. He was happy with that idea. But when I talked to him at our last meeting a few days ago, he said that uh, an announcements page would fit better because he didn't just want random people getting on there and posting whatever. So, I agree with that. I turned the forum into an announcements page, and it's not the most polished out, but again, I had to scale back a whole bunch of stuff and not a whole lot of time. Uh, so, like you have the list of the threads, and these are examples, of course, because he also told me that he wasn't looking to get the website published right now. And so, like the backend and all that other stuff, like the hosts and whatnot, I decided to hold off on getting because if I spend this money to get the hosts and the backend and all that stuff set up, like the hosts in the database, and then it just sits vacant for 6 months or 9 months until whenever he decides he's going to put up the website, I decided it's better if we just wait until we're ready to put the website up and then we get that stuff set up. So what I did manage to do was get like an example version of it set up by using JavaScript and HTML for like a local storage. So this is examples that I have set up on the JavaScript file. So you click on the link you click on the announcement, it'll take you to this page where it'll have this right here will be like the title for the page, and then right here, where it says thread content will be whatever content is on the announcement, and then of course underneath it is a timestamp, and it's the same thing for the announcement too. And I only had two examples. This could be as many or as many as you want or as few as you want. It'll load them all, and you can go on there and interact with them. Now, I didn't quite manage to get the admin accounts or training created for it because I had some stuff come up, some family emergencies come up that took up a lot of my time that I was going to use to be able to work on this. So I didn't quite get that done. But, like I said earlier, Houston was very happy with it, and I do plan to go back and finish it so that he can use it in the future. So, that and a couple of other things I was wanting to polish up that I didn't quite get all the way there. I know there's some spots, mainly with my responsive web page design, I noticed that whenever, like, the desktop view and the tablet view looked fine, but then whenever I did smartphone view, sometimes it got a bit wonky. So going back and fixing some of the stuff like that, I didn't get the chance to go do. But the last page we have is the contact page. And this is, you can, I'll either call, click, or email them. And whenever I emailed Houston, well, not email. I texted Houston because I didn't know if his dad had an email or not. He said, just go ahead and make one up for now, and then whenever we get further down the road, we can add an official church email because they don't have one right now. So it'd just be his dad's personal email, and it makes sense that you don't want to have your personal email and, you know, something like this. But, you got his phone number, you got his email, and, that's the final page. So now we go to the lessons that I learned. While I was working on this, I did, like, I had an idea of what I was doing, but I wasn't, I didn't have the finish line insight. It was kind of one of those where I start going, and as I'm picking things up or as I'm working on it, it becomes clearer. And for the most part, that was the case, but I did run into a couple of issues that I spent some time trying to fix, and I wasn't able to get them fixed, so I plugged my code into into like a, I think it was Microsoft Copilot, whichever one. I use Microsoft Edge for my browser, so whatever the default AI is for that, I plugged it in there because I wasn't able to find the issue that was kept causing the problems, and I was hoping they could. And it did, it pointed out the issue immediately, but I didn't spot it immediately because I was kind of skimming over it to see if anything stuck out, anything obvious stuck out, or if it was going to be like an entire redesign, which I was hoping was the case. But I did eventually get it figured out, and the AI suggested some functions and stuff that would that would help my website and make it look a little better and still help it function even if there was some information missing. So I went ahead and added it to my to the to what I had basically. But I really only relied on this whenever I got stuck and I just wasn't able to figure out a solution. So the first one, like the borrowed code, what I took from the AI was if what originally started the issue was whenever I had my JavaScript file, and then I had the HTML file that was trying to pull information from the JavaScript file. Sometimes, or not sometimes, it worked fine initially, but then whenever, like when I had the examples and everything on the HTML file, but then whenever I tried to do like a dynamic loading onto my HTML file using the JavaScript file, then it couldn't find the threads. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure this out as to why it wasn't working. I tried looking up walkthroughs and, plugging in my, like basically trying to compare my code to other examples to see if I could figure out where I was going wrong, and I just couldn't figure it out. So whenever I plugged into AI, it said, well, the first problem is whenever it's checking for threads and whatnot, if a thread doesn't exist, then it gets angry and just crashes. So, problem number one. This is up here as a function that will keep that from happening. If it cannot find a thread, it'll just put to the console that the thread doesn't exist, or something along those lines, where that way that it can keep going instead of just crashing immediately and causing problems. The next one, and these next two are like security type. This one prevents cross-site scripting attacks by basically, or no, it's this one that turns everything into plain text. But these two functions, I know that there's a slight difference between them, and I did look it up, but I've since forgotten. But the point of these is to keep. I think cross-site scripting is attacking the server side, like trying to just go straight through the server side, and then injection attacks is going from client to server. But anyway, I took this code because again, extra security and stuff that I hadn't thought to put on there, and I added those to the pages where the user can enter in information and keep to help keep the site safer, basically. And again, like this was the cross-site scripting, and this one's the code injection. If you were, like in the comments, if you were to go and type in, like I have here at the bottom, script malicious data here, script, it would inject that into whatever is existing in the HTML file, and that can just cause a whole lot of problems. It can start skimming data, hacking other people's systems and whatnot. Bad news for everybody all around. So I decided to include these for everyone else's sake. So, on to a little bit more information about when I got stuck trying to find the information for the threads, and I did feel a little silly after I eventually figured it out. Um, the like to summarize the issue, whenever I was running the window.location.search.slice, I originally had a 1 when I should have had a 4. this caused problems because whenever it's searching the URL for the information to pull the ID, um, right here I have an example. You have the port number and everything, and then the file or the folders, and then you get to the file, which was thread.html. It has this question mark ID equals 1 at the end. Whenever I only had it set up to be a 1, it would slice off the question mark but leave the ID equals 1. In my JavaScript file, the ID for the thread was just 1. So whenever it tried to look for it, it would try searching for 1, or it would be searching for ID equals 1 when it should have been searching for 1. So that was what was causing my problem initially. And again, I didn't realize it until some time had passed and I was working on other spots on my website. I was like, let me try this because, why not? And, this stems from a misunderstanding that I had because if, from what I remember the last time I was working on a website, you would just put the 1 at the end and it would go from the end of it and not the beginning. So that was a misunderstanding and something that I had to learn the hard way, basically. It took me a long time to get that figured out. And I had a similar issue with the, basically whenever, on my form at HTML, whenever it was pulling the information from the JavaScript file, the way I had it set up, I had, my title and my information, everything, calling all the files, and you want to call those first, because if you don't, then it causes the problems that I was having here, which is why I was so confused, because I had called the JavaScript file before I'd started doing anything else related to the, with the scripting and everything in the HTML. But apparently, when, even though I called the script file first, it would, I guess, take too long to load. My best understanding is that it would take too long to load, and it would continue running the rest of the code, so whenever it started looking for things like the thread.id, well, because just above this I had the script form.js or whatever, it was still loading, so whenever it would try to pull the thread.id doesn't exist. So rinse and repeats of earlier with trying to pull the ID number, it would just crash because it doesn't, it's not initialized, it doesn't know what I'm talking about. It's very confusing. Um, and I did, when I was looking up the walkthroughs, the guides, whatever you want to call it, I did grab this function from there because it was just a much neater version of what I had, and in the end looked a lot better. Because before, what I had before was I didn't have the date. I had the ID and the title, but I was trying to figure out how to pull the date, and I should have thought of just pulling like the current time, but then in my head whenever I'm doing my testing, every time I refresh the page, it pulls the current date. And I guess probably whenever I get to the server side, that might be an issue. I have to, or no, whenever I get to the server side, it's going to be handling it differently. It's going to be handling it through the logic instead of through this. I'll have this be pulled through on that end of things. But yeah, this was just much cleaner than what I had, so I decided to go with it. And you have like your HTML here, and it'll inject. Like I said, it'll inject the information from the form.javascript files and whatnot, and then place them into a container, and then that'll be what we saw on the announcement page where it pulls the information for the announcements. So, to summarize what I've done, I built a website with the basic web pages, and it had, I didn't show the responsive web design. I wasn't thinking, it's brain fart on my part, but, it had responsive web design. I think I got most of the way through the accessibility. There were some things that I missed, but again, that all boils down to I didn't end up having time because of those emergencies that happened. It took a lot of the time that I wanted to be working on this. So, I got the responsive web design. I took the logo and made the color scheme based off of the church logo. I originally had a forum with login and backend logic and all, login, sign up, all that stuff, but then whenever Houston decided he wanted an announcements page, I still have those files in there. I just changed the forum.html file into an announcements file and moved the other stuff into a folder, into a different folder that I have access to in case he decides he changes his mind. I can just add that stuff straight back, and it'll blend in perfectly. And as I also said earlier, I did have hosts for the web host and then a host for the database and everything lined up. But when Houston told me he was going to hold off on it, I decided not. I didn't decide not to do anything because if it's going to be sitting vacant for 6, 9, 10 months or whatever before he decides he wants to use it, well then he only gets that section of time to use it before he has to pay full price or whatever if he goes a year at a time or something along those lines. So that's where everything is at, and thank you for watching my presentation.